Machiavelli lived from 1469 to 1527. The philosopher Bertrand Russell referred to Machiavelli's most well-known book, The Prince, as a gangster's handbook. And while there's no doubt that certain people have read and used it as such, I think that if we put it into the context of when it was written, which was Italy, especially Florence, in the 15th and 16th centuries, it will be easier to judge Machiavelli's reasons for writing it. Now, the Italy of that period was made up of a number of city-states, often at war with each other. Add to that threats from foreign powers, especially France, and it was a very unstable and dangerous situation. Machiavelli loved his home city, Florence, and wanted to protect its culture, history, and above all, independence at all costs. One way to do this was to establish an army of Florentines loyal to the city-state of Florence. Much of Machiavelli's career was taken up with this issue. It must be remembered, though, that he led an active civic life, was deeply into politics, and was an ambassador for Florence. In this way, he got to meet and observe some of the key players of the time, and through this came to understand the nature of power and how to hold on to it. The Prince was an attempt to teach Florence the lessons he had learnt.
This lecture is about Machiavelli and his book The Prince, and how he got a bad reputation as a ruthless man who will do anything to get what he wants. The lecturer's aim is to try and persuade us to look at the book in its historical context to see why he wrote it, and to show that his reputation is undeserved. Machiavelli loved his hometown, Florence, and was prepared to do anything to protect it. At the time, it was threatened by several enemies, so only harsh measures would do.
We have briefly looked at some of the problems involved in running a biggish city, like, say, Melbourne, keeping the road and rail systems running, policing, providing food and housing, and so on. In another lecture, I'm going to deal with what we must now call the megalopolis, cities with populations of 10 million or more. However, first, I want to go back in history to when the population of cities could be numbered in the thousands rather than the millions. One of the earliest theorists of the city was, of course, Plato, who created an ideal city in his text, The Republic. The population of this city would be around 25 to 30,000 at most. Oddly enough, the same figures were chosen by Leonardo da Vinci for his ideal cities. Now, of these 25 to 30,000 inhabitants, only about 5,000 would be citizens. A reason for this might be that it is the largest number that could be addressed publicly at one time and by one person, and makes a voting system much easier to manage. Also, perhaps the numbers are kept deliberately low because a large population would be harder to control, or because, in practical terms, fewer inhabitants are easier to feed from local supplies without having to depend on outside sources.
After a brief mention of the megalopolis, the lecturer focuses on the small city-state, particularly ideal cities like those imagined by Plato and Da Vinci. He puts forward possible reasons why the number of citizens was limited to about 5,000, suggesting that small numbers made voting easier and were easier to feed on food produced locally instead of having to import it.
Today, I want to look at some research that has been done into what motivates people, and particularly on what is called the mindset, or more simply, the mental attitude that highly motivated people have. And, of course, the attitude of those who aren't so motivated, or who lose their motivation. Now, it's obvious that motivation is crucial to performance, but that doesn't tell us where it comes from. Why is it that some people work hard and do well, while others can work just as hard and don't? Why some are committed to what they are doing and others aren't? Finding answers to this question would be extremely useful to educators, as well as in other areas of life. Businesses, for example, have long believed that financial incentives, bonuses, perks, pay rises, are the great motivators. And, to an extent, they can make a difference. But what we are calling the mindset is more important. What has made it difficult to find out what the causes of motivation are is that motivation and the capacity for hard work can be mistaken for talent, thinking it's a gift. Either you've got it or you haven't. People who believe this have a fixed mindset and are not only going to perform less well than they could, but it's also an attitude that will affect their whole outlook on life. Some say that if talent is something people are born with and you're unlucky enough not to have any, then there's not much point in putting in all that extra effort for no real reward. However, research has shown that if you put in the hours, practice brings the same level of achievement as talent. It's a question of changing this fixed attitude and adopting a growth attitude, which includes seeing mistakes and failures as opportunities to improve.
The subject is motivation and success, and how an understanding of what it is would benefit both business and education. Incentives are not the answer, because it is a mental attitude that involves being prepared to work hard and above all learn from mistakes. Nor is it a question of talent, since those who are gifted also need to put in the hours to develop their talent. In fact, hard work can outdo talent.